George W. Bush housing rep of some sort in his administration, who used to be an investment banker, had mentioned, it was all over the New York Post, Yahoo Finance, and other media outlets, but I don't think it was like on major media outlets. So that kind of tells you like maybe they don't believe it or there's not enough evidence. But Tucker Carlson is the person who was interviewing this person.
Right.
And essentially she was saying that supposedly they spent, I think it was about $21 trillion for a society underground, over 170
21 trillion.
How much?
21 trillion.
Yeah, that's
like the US's net debt. That's like the same amount almost. Right?
Yeah, because we're 36 trillion in debt.
That's where it all went.
Huh?
In this underground doomsday base.
Well, think about the Pentagon. The Pentagon has a lot of funds that it just goes MIA in terms of like when you ask where's the money going.
Right.
So according to her, she did say it's an estimate. So who knows? Could be a bunch of BS.
This is from the Tucker Carlson podcast, but it is a cabinet member from the George W.'s administration.
Her name here.
Oh, you need the name? Catherine Austin Fitz. She served as the Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development for Housing between 1989 and 1990. Oh, so this is George H.W. This isn't George W.
Oh, so it's the senior.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was junior.
No.
You're right.
Okay. And I think, people have a lot more respect for HW than W, although
that's true.
They're all about that Iraq war either way. But
21 trillion, that's a shitload, dude.
That's a lot of money.
That's a ton of money. So there's like we'll put it in the B-roll here, or whatever we call it, but
it's in the Ozarks, right?
So she didn't explain exactly where it's located. She said all over the US and all over the world.
Base and city infrastructure and transportation system that's been built. And
I'm sorry?
Yes. So we have built an extraordinary number of underground bases and supposedly transportation systems. Some of these are some of these are documented as part of the national security infrastructure. I think there are many more.
For the very elite and the government officials to essentially keep society and the human race going. But the Ozarks was with Jesse Ventura, who's like a former governor, former WWE, I think, or WF or whatever.
Former Navy SEAL.
Navy SEAL, thank you for saying that. He'd be pissed off. He'd probably smack me in the face if he heard me not say that.
Either way, he'd smack you in the face.
I don't think so. No. Yeah, so that was interesting because he had a show about the Ozarks in Missouri that back like 15 years ago that people would make societies underground. So it kind of goes to what this lady's saying. I don't know if I believe it, though.
Carlson responded by claiming that he actually knew, quote unquote, a contractor who worked on one in Washington, D.C., stating, I remember him telling me about a power box, like a transformer box on Constitution Avenue. He told me that was actually the exit, the egress from the White House. And you know what? If that was the egress from the White House, that would make a lot more sense because I think the main concern people have is that taxpayer dollars were used to bail out the super wealthy and super powerful people, and instead of at the end of the day, they can't build a safety rocket ship for the entire country.
They definitely cannot.
I think most
million.
People wouldn't be surprised that there are plans like this, but obviously it should definitely come out of some of the people that are going to be in there's pockets. It shouldn't come out of the taxpayer. Right.
But I think taxpayer money is going towards this, supposedly, from what I understand. And that's the problem. Yeah. Like, if it came out of the elite people with wealth that paid for it themselves, that's one thing.
They have
but if
the
it's
money.
Taxpayer, then that's, exactly. But 21 trillion, I mean, that's like everyone.
Yeah.
But Andrew Bustamante, former CIA agent, I always like to bring up the CIA because we had a CIA officer at the very top of the top on our podcast about a year ago.
Andrew, get on our podcast, please.
Andrew Bustamante would be amazing if you jump on. But he was basically saying that the U.S. government, I don't know if I agree with this, but he said something along the lines that the government does not care about its citizens. It cares about the U.S. government for continuing and surviving. So when it comes to something like this type of story, it makes sense to me because the top elite, those in government that want to survive and keep the human race going, but have America, the United States of America, going, it makes sense to me why they would do something like that. Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's so important that someone like ourselves, I mean, during COVID, I'm not gonna BS you, but like during COVID, I was going into the whole like survival mode. You know, I got more ammo, got some firearms.
Prepper.
Kind of a prepper. I became
Yeah.
kind of a prepper in a way.
It's hard to be a prepper in LA.
Well, I wasn't in LA I was in Orange County and San Diego
Yeah.
more so, but I had friends that are in law enforcement and some other stuff. And essentially we were talking about shit hits the fan. We would like go to one particular location into like the mountains, get away from the city, get away from the coast. And I think that's a way to survive short term, but long term, it's not enough.
Yeah. Facts.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Facts.
I mean, you can survive without food for a while, but water is
LA
like the most
would
important.
be one of the worst places to be during like an apocalypse. You know what I mean?
In terms of
depends on the apocalypse, but think about it, like you're so congested, it's difficult to escape. First of all, it's a prime target for any sort of nuclear attack because of how dense the population is.
New York too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the
San
some
Diego.
adversary is going to want to take out New York and LA first.
I mean,
right. And DC,
of course. And then, and that also goes for like some, Florida, Miami, anywhere on the coast where there's a lot of people, which is where most people are anyway.
Right.
But
I think the inland area of San Diego is like the best area for someone like myself to go to because I live in the West Coast. You don't anymore, which you're kind of fortunate about it. I think that's probably the best place, and I'm kind of giving out my location where I would go, which is not good.
Well, it depends on what it is. Like during 2020, I basically had a go bag, and I was ready to cross that border.
Same as me. There you go.
Yeah, I mean the border was a good resource for that because what was really going down was like a political issue in the United States.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
right.
So I was prepared for that. Get out of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I got all my boys. Pretty much we were all in the same boat in terms of what we're going to do next. And I think it's important to think like that. Unfortunately, that's just the way it goes, especially if you have like a family or you're married. The ladies, not all of them, but most of them I feel will not necessarily think that far through or that dark place.
Well,
sometimes we have to.
Most people don't.
Most people, even men won't. Yeah. But I go there. If I have to, I'll go there.
Yeah.
In terms of survival, because things will get really out of hand if people are hungry and not good people to begin with. So
you can tell like we as a country failed every test. Toilet paper gone.
I know.
I mean, like, we failed every single test.
That was kind of embarrassing.
There wasn't a test we passed as a country.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. I wonder what other countries thought of us for like.
Well, they didn't pass them either.
They didn't pass either?
Well, the people who quote unquote passed the most were the most authoritarian. So nobody won. COVID.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Well, I think the Chinese economy did pretty well.
Well, that's because they were selling all the products and drugs to the United States.
They were primed.
So it makes sense.
Well. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
But the people of China, you can see from the videos, did not win.
No, the government always usually wins when it comes to stuff like that, and that's kind of the point.
That's
people
the point
don't
of having a plan is because I think one thing we learned in 2020, 2021, 2022 is that when things really pop off, nobody's going to have your back but you.
100%.
And your family.
100%.
Like you can't be dependent on these institutions to prevent large-scale protests. They're going to make the situation worse in some cases. I think that we learned at that moment in time that you should be responsible for
yourself.
Yeah, yourself, your family, your loved ones, and also be compassionate to other people you don't know. But you can't depend on external variables.
100%. But like you kind of said, a lot of people still don't follow that. Like whatever they see on TV, whatever they hear from the government, which a lot of times the government has a good point, and you should follow what they say, sort of. But you got to think critically. Otherwise, you're just sheep. So with that all said, Chris, if shit hit the fan in Atlanta, which is where you live now, you used to live in San Diego, you being military background and you knowing a lot of stuff, what the heck would you do?
I think the first thing is, preparation's key.
Right.
I think we can all take a look at, our resources that we currently have and make sure that you have backup water and just the easy essentials. Have a way to pay for things that's not electronic. Gold is probably one of the best things, some sort of gold bar or something of that nature. anything you can kind of trade, a nice watch.
Good point. Good point.
So I think the real victory comes from how prepared you already are when things hit the fan. But I think one of the best things you can do, and especially if you're like I'm near a big city, inside of a big city technically, is as long as you're prepared. I mean, that's the key. Kind of staying, if you can stay inside, if you can stay outside of the noise. Atlanta was pretty, obvious for obvious reasons, was pretty wild in 2020. It was one of the places that was on the news.
I didn't know that. Really?
Oh yeah, and CNN obviously's headquarters were out here, and so you saw a lot of that on the news.
I guess you're right.
But yeah, Atlanta was pretty. And the one thing that made more sense to me about Atlanta than a lot of other cities is usually a lot of the protesting and stuff happens in poor neighborhoods. Atlanta took it to Buckhead, and you could at least make the point that they went in the right areas for their protests.
Buckhead, because Buckhead is more upscale, right?
It's more upscale, but what you see in a lot of these sort of protests is people protesting and destroying their own communities.
That's the problem.
Yeah,
that's what they don't understand. They're really effing themselves up.
In Atlanta, I would say that they went to the right places. It seems.
Oh, I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Interesting.
But I think the main thing is to, if you can avoid large crowded areas, and until you can really, because you really want to assess what's going on and make the best decisions from there. It just depends on the situation entirely.
But if you can go underground, you have like a basement. I think that's probably like the best place to go.
If I had $21 trillion, I would be in a lot better shape. I
think you would. I think you would.
What about you? I mean, you're in LA. Where do you go? Like, what's your plan? Is it to get out of the country?
I don't know. One thing I didn't look into was I don't really know how Mexico did in terms of like
they did great
in the pandemic.
During the pandemic, Tijuana and Atlanta were the places people went when they still wanted to party and have fun.
Okay,
what's cool about Georgia, and I like
that's like partying though.
I like purple, but I'm just saying they were a lot more open, right? I like purple states because there's that argument that happens, and you end up with the best policy. If a state's all red or all blue, you just end up getting like the worst of whatever it is. And people just vote that way. But one cool thing about Atlanta and Georgia, I think, is Atlanta is blue, Georgia's red, and I think you end up with some pretty cool policies.
Like Austin, Texas.
It is. It's like that. Yeah.
It's a good point.
But anyways, that's.
Yeah, I think if you can get like a close knit of friends that can like sort of have your back in a way to like communicate, because communication with other people would be key.
Well, I think community, right? So like our HOA where I live, like I feel like we have a really good HOA for something like that. Like we have some solid people in my neighborhood.
Right.
It's a community for sure. We recently had an issue with. I mean, it's not recently. Since I've lived here, there's been people occasionally that will just go to our mailboxes and steal our mail. Right?
Weird.
It's happened like 3 or 4 times since I've been here, and our community agreed to have Flock, which is it reads their license plates.
Interesting.
And that is something like. And by the way, my neighborhood's actually quite diverse. It's I couldn't tell you what the statistics are exactly, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was if I was a minority in this neighborhood. It would be pretty close.
Makes sense, yeah.
But I live in a pretty good community, so I think that's important. Is where you live, where your neighbors, and I think that we would stick together.
That is nice to hear, because in my community on the West Coast, California, Southern California. I don't know if that would be the case for me. So it'd kind of be like a situation where you're just survival of the fittest and you're on your own. And I would be prepared for it.
The wildfires was a good example. Although people did bond together, right? It seemed like people were bonding together on that.
Yeah, they kind of did. Yeah, I would say so.
It seems like they rallied together against the mayor.
They did, but nothing happened.
Not yet. The election hasn't happened yet.
You're right.